power supply on these is a little bit trickier than the older PS4s. You do have to, I believe, get it's either 1 or 2 screws on the board side out before you can completely release the power supply. So let's get our bottom case off. More dust bunnies, but nothing worrying. And let's see. For our power supply, definitely one of these 2 Phillips screws, maybe both of them. See if that's what I need. Much better. Put that up. Wi-Fi antenna can be snuck out. And disconnect power supply. So far I'm pretty hopeful with this guy because it really does not look like we have any sign of liquid infiltration anywhere. So if we're just looking at either an HDMI port or an HDMI encoder, this should be a pretty quick and cheap job. Now the Slims, we actually get to leave the disk drive and the fan alone at this point. Just want to make sure we unclip any of the antennas for later on. Don't want to have one of the Wi-Fi antennas snag the board as you're trying to get it out later. Dust bunnies and plastic nibs. Now over to the other side, just like with the first PS4, we have a really large plate which serves both it's kind of as a secondary heatsink, but also just as a way of giving structure to an otherwise plastic device. And it's pretty easy to get off. We just have a lot more types of screws than on the first PS4s. And there's one little trick I like to use to keep track of them. Since we have so many alternating silver and black screws, what I like to do is actually color the holes when I take them out. Taking either a Sharpie or a paint pen. Paint pen is my preference, although these new guys need to be worn in a little bit. It's real simple to just give a quick color-coded mark to each of these holes. Later on, if you're forgetful like I am, you don't need to look up your own video to figure out where they go back. got some silver for our silver screws. See if we missed one or two. All right, let's get this board out. Now, word to the wise, if you do have a particularly disgusting console, such as one that was infested or it has a lot of rust you want to brush off, definitely let these either pen marks or paint marks dry considerably before you start cleaning it. I made the mistake when I started doing this little marking strategy of marking it before alcoholing a particularly disgusting device. And alcohol and paint don't mix very well. That will be it for black screws. You do have to be somewhat careful once we switch back to the bare stainless screws, because there are a couple on this plate that are slightly different length. I believe it's going to be the two drive screws, so we'll do those last to be sure. And even after you take out these 20 some odd screws from this large steel plate, we do have one of them hiding on the other side. Not that I don't like progress and appreciate when things are made smaller, but when it comes to doing the screws on this device, I long for working on the first gen PS4s. Okay, our drive screws, a little shorter. These are machine screws because they're threading into metal, whereas everything else is essentially threading into plastic. And when we do our center screw here, this should release. Oh, no, that's a negative. Forget about the other drive screws. Two more machine screws. Always manage to lose one of them. There we go. Give a couple marks there. For forgetful people like me. And it looks like all of our pads stayed on the board. Well, not there. Yeah, factory new. Well, the one thing I'll say that's a bit strange about this device, in particular, which I don't remember seeing on other PS4 Slims, is difference in coating on the heatsink screws. We've got a black heatsink screw and we've got a plated silver heatsink screw. A bit odd, considering they're not different in any way. Okay, with all of our board cables on top of the plate taken out, there's going to be one guy hidden on the side here. And if you're like me with giant fingers, a little tough to get out. Slightly easier to get in, but definitely not easy to get out. And that's our board. Really love looking at these next to the first PS4s because they really shrunk the board by almost half. Later on, so with every console, we're only going to replace the thermal paste with new. Never reuse the old paste. If you're giving back a customer a repair, the last thing you want is for them to complain about overheating a week later. And just a little alcohol will do it. Clean up our dust bunnies. And let's take a look at this HDMI port. Pins really look pretty good. Now the factory soldering on these is never really fully flowed, but a dead indicator of whether it's bad or not is if this extra clear layer of coating is starting to scrape off or not. We definitely don't have any pins moving. Now before, when we powered this guy up, we did get some random flashes of black on the display, rather than just simply no signal. But realistically, we've got a port that looks like that on the inside, and this on the outside. This one we're definitely not looking at a port issue. So we want to go to the codec IC next. These little Panasonic chips do vary a bit from generation to generation. But what's nice is that they are, I believe, all QFN packages with no BGAs. So for a relatively large chip, it is pretty easy to put down there on the board. Now, what I've had once before with a cockroach-infested device, we were looking at no image, actually due to bridged points on the edge of the chip. So rather than the normal corrosion you'd see from water, there's actually some biological material along the edge here. And if you clean up any bridges, sometimes the chip will survive, which is exactly what happened to me in that case. But this IC looks beautiful. Even though there's tiniest bit of oxidation on some of these probe points, still looks like there's never been a drop of water inside this device. Now, in my experience, these ICs tend to go from water, but also certainly from drops. And since the surrounding components look to be in excellent shape, one errant solder ball. Never want to ignore an errant solder ball. But this particular cap still reads as good. Most of these PS4s, you gotta scrape off a little bit of that clear coating. I'm not sure if you'd even call it conformal coating, but just clear overcoat. With good contact, we've got about 2 million ohms. So, errant solder ball, just a little bit of factory overflow maybe. So we're just going to do our due diligence to check few other components around the IC, but this definitely looks like we're just going to be replacing the IC with new. I don't remember offhand what this component is. Generally speaking, there are no schematics to be found for PS4, so those that exist, you sort of have to make yourself from known good boards. We're looking at about 2.3 kilo ohms here. This is one of the common diodes that you'll see windshield wipered from the board for every at-home heat-gunned HDMI job. So these little DJ diodes are handy to keep around. PS4 first generation, you have a line of about 5 of them here. Almost every previous repair attempt I see, they are just missing completely. Alright. Now our friend here looks a little bit distressed. Possibility that it shot out a ball underneath here. Now I don't know if this is simply a coil functioning as a fuse, or if we're looking at a bad capacitor. 22 ohms. That's a good candidate once we figure out what you are. But we're going to keep going. Skipping our filters for now. We'll check for continuity next. And let's just make sure we get everything that could be just a grounding capacitor from the IC. Looks good. Several kilo ohms on each. And here we are back to our start. HDMI filters. Make sure we've got no broken lines here. More clear coat to scrape around. So here we come back to this little gentleman or lady. Let's see. Looks like we may be tracing this to our rightmost pin. Looks like we're just looking at about a 20 ohm resistor here. This line we've got full continuity from the pin to this side. And about just over 22 ohms. Okay, so we may just have a fuse here. And I believe our diode was good. All right. So our next step is to change Mr. Panasonic here. We have an MN 864729, which unfortunately is not going to match anything we have in stock today. So that about leaves it for today. Once we restock our MN 864729, we will get back to work on this guy. goodbye for today, and thanks for watching.